Attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time to join this KnowledgeSmart webinar. So today, for the next hour or so, we're going to be talking about how you can demonstrate individual and team BIM capability, and we're going to be looking at a range of new material in the KnowledgeSmart library, and we're also going to be talking about the wider issues and legislation around BIM and particularly BIM Level 2. Just before we start, though, I just wanted to hand over to my colleague Lisa just for a couple of quick housekeeping announcements.
Hi everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. You should see a screen coming up just talking a little bit about the GoToWebinar housekeeping, attendee participation aspects of it. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the GoToWebinar interface, but for those people that are new, you should see a chat area in your control panel on the right, which you can use to ask questions at any point in time. We will have a question and answer session at the end, but please feel free to add any comments or questions as the webinar is progressing. If we open the questions up for live, just remember to unmute yourself when you would like to ask a question. And then the only other aspect is the next slide. Just a couple of rules of engagement for this webinar. As I said, we'll handle the Q&A at the end. If anyone's got any issues or questions they want to raise about the webinar, please do so via our Twitter handle, KSBIML2, and please retweet them or use the hashtag to share any information that you find interesting. If you've got any technical difficulties, please let us know via the chat box so we can address those. And just remember, the webinar is being recorded, so you will receive a link to the recording after the webinar. We do encourage active participation, so please use the chat box for that. Thanks, Rory.
Thanks, Lisa. That's great. Okay, so quick note on today's agenda then. What we're going to be talking through BIM Level 2 and how we can get a better feel for how we capture useful metrics. The new assessment collection, so we've been creating a variety of new material in addition to the existing KnowledgeSmart library material. We'll have a quick look at the BIM Level 2 survey that we've added to allow you to capture metrics of slightly different nature. The existing KnowledgeSmart library and how that breaks down into different categories and industry disciplines. Quick look at the personal dashboards and how you can use those to enhance and complement individual CPD and appraisals, and the KnowledgeSmart stats. So the kind of global picture and just a quick look at the wider picture of the KnowledgeSmart statistics and benchmarks, who we partner with, and some of the customers that we work with. Then, as Lisa was saying, we'll open that up to kind of a Q&A afterwards for any other questions or queries that you have that you'd like to go through. So a quick word on who we have. Myself, Rory Vance, I'm the founder and CEO of KnowledgeSmart, and I'm joined by my friend and colleague Nigel Davis, who's the principal at Evolve Consultancy. So it's always a pleasure and always good fun to work with Nigel, and we've worked as partners, and he's also one of our principal authors for many years now, so it's my great privilege to introduce to you today Nigel Davies.
Good afternoon, everybody. Sorry, I just had to unmute myself there. I was talking to myself. Yeah, so I'll be giving a bit of insight into the approach to UK BIM Level 2 and actually how we've been involved with KnowledgeSmart over the years, and how that's helped us to be able to assess and identify capabilities of the staff that we work with. I'll just be chipping in as we go on through the afternoon. Back over to you, Rory.
Thanks, Nigel. So before we start, Lisa, I think you wanted to just have a quick snap poll, didn't you, just to get a couple of
hands up for everybody. If everyone can please just quickly answer that question for us. Fantastic. I see that.
Is your organisation directly impacted by the Level 2 mandate? That's the first question.
Thanks for all the responses. I see them coming in. Great. Okay, Rory, I think we can move on to the next one.
Yeah.
Just closing that one down quickly. Here we go. And just one more, if everyone can please answer this question for us. It just helps us to get to know our audience a bit better. Fantastic. Great to see all the newcomers, quite a few people who are completely new to the world of KnowledgeSmart. So welcome, and we hope that you are going to get to know us a little bit better through this webinar. Thank you very much for everyone. I'll close that down.
Fantastic. Everyone, thank you, Lisa. So just to open up, really, I guess it's about just looking at the context of BIM, the impact it's had across the built environment and the construction industry, and it's sort of affected firms of all different sizes. So although it's not a new concept now, and Nigel's going to be going into kind of the more technical aspects of BIM in detail fairly shortly, but it really is quite interesting working with firms sort of small, medium, large, and very large in terms of headcount and also geographical spread. A lot of the challenges are broadly similar, and I think introducing the ability to capture benchmark statistics and metrics, actually start taking measurements of how people are approaching this topic, I think that's certainly one of the ingredients which will help firms to improve their performance. For those of you that aren't familiar with KnowledgeSmart, just very briefly, we're a cloud-based software company. We work exclusively in the AEC industry, so our entire customer base is made up of firms of architects and engineers and multidisciplinary firms in lots of different parts of the world. And we've sort of focused our efforts mainly on trying to help firms in those industries just to get a slightly better feel for capability, measuring capability, how people are doing using different tools, different technical tools. And over the course of the last sort of 15 years or so now, we have kind of built a reasonably big footprint in terms of the companies that use the service, also the user base, the assessment data that's captured, the partners that we work with, the author network that we've grown over that period of time. And that's quite useful because we're able to share back quite a lot of data, which we'll look at a little bit later in the presentation, from a regional and also a global perspective. So I think that ever-growing footprint is quite useful in terms of the metrics that we're able to capture, soak up, and then share back into the industry, because it's a fairly unique view that we're able to present back in terms of how firms are using the technology that they're spending such a lot of time and money implementing. So it's always quite useful to know how you stand in the broader context. So I'm just going to pass back to a little bit more background to the whole story of BIM, and particularly BIM Level 2.
Thanks very much, Rory. I'd just like to say here, the one thing we've got to get past is that BIM itself is not about the technology. We're not talking about necessarily the production of models. We're talking about the whole process surrounding BIM, and that's really kind of key to the UK's adoption of BIM Level 2, as it is termed at this point in time. I think that the real important thing to appreciate with adopting BIM is that it's about managing change, and the management of that change is pivotal on the people who are there to deliver it, not the technology in and of itself. I think it's kind of a very good way of putting it is that BIM is a change of mindset. It's an opportunity to put away the way you used to do things and all the arguments about why you can't do something, and actually start to reinvent your approach to proactive development, of which April 2016 was just the deadline for the UK mandate. It was just the start. It's been a catalyst for the amazing changes that we've seen over the last couple of years in the UK, and not just in the public arena, but actually in the private sector, which is probably, I would have said now, outstripping the public in terms of demand. It's becoming uncommon for projects not to request BIM rather than the other way around now. And I think it's time to stop thinking and discussing about what BIM is or what BIM isn't, and actually start to look at what it's there to do, and that's improve the delivery of projects. You know, the old adage, people, process, technology, that's what it's all about in that order. Without the technology, without the people, we can't deliver the process. Without the process, we can't use the technology. The solution addresses all of them, but it has to always be focused on people. Next slide, please, Rory. That's okay. It's BIM Level 2 is one of those things that everybody has their own perception on what it means, and it becomes a very subjective kind of interpretation sometimes. For us, actually coming into this from an assessment point of view, it's why KnowledgeSmart has been so critical to us. Next slide as well, please, actually, Rory. Oh, sorry, I'm one ahead. KnowledgeSmart is critical to us to actually be able to ascertain where the knowledge gaps are and what we need to actually address in terms of skills gaps, and be looking at continual development for the staff involved in BIM. It's no good to have looked back 2 years ago and see what skills we've had. Things have moved on, developments moved on. Uniclass 2015, for example, has been released and is now far more widespread than it has been before. It has to be used as part of a continual assessment, maybe turned into, you know, the annual staff appraisals, to make sure that we are getting the best capability assessments out of our staff as we possibly can. So, you know, also, how do you demonstrate the ability to deliver BIM Level 2? It's something that's asked, and we'll talk about a little bit later, particularly in the PAS 91 questions. The pre-qualification questionnaires demonstrate you have the skills. That's what we use KnowledgeSmart for. Thanks, Rory.
Nigel. So in terms of what we wanted to achieve, our objective with this new assessment collection, it was really to build upon the library of material that we created already. So we work with a number of different firms of architects and engineers to try and help them measure capability across a range of different technology solutions they've already deployed in their business on projects day in, day out. So tools like the Autodesk suite of tools, or the Bentley Systems suite of tools, or some of the other technical solutions like Graphisoft, or some of the modeling tools that are deployed, or the engineering tools that are deployed. So in addition to that, we wanted to give firms the ability to capture complementary metrics, different data, which will add some additional value to the way that they are able to train and educate their teams on not just the technology and the software side, but also the business side, the process side, relevant and relative to the different roles and responsibilities that are taking place. So what we've done is we've kind of tried to put together a range of new material which covers all those different aspects. And I'm just going to pass back to Nigel again in a second to go through in quite low-level detail. But at a high level, it's sort of a look at BIM itself as a concept, and a lot of the documentation that's been created around BIM Level 2, the sort of the conceptual side of it, the theory side, and also the different applications that different users have when they're coordinating and deploying and managing those software tools that are being deployed on projects and used on projects in an office, or in an engineering office or a design studio, day in, day out. So let's just take a look one at a time at those different aspects that we've been working on and authoring material. Look at the high level stuff from that point of view.
Okay, Rory. So what you can see here is a breakdown of the different groups that we've tried to put into these different question sets. I should just kind of add here that while we have been a significant part of the authorship of these questions, they've come from a number of different industry people. These aren't just one person's perspective. These are a series of assessments that have been pulled together from different people around the country, and actually abroad as well. So there is a lot of relevance to this outside of the UK BIM Level 2 specifics. So what we've got here, and you can see, is 4 different groups at this point of different types of BIM assessments that we've been looking at. The first one you've got there is the awareness of BIM Level 2, which, as it describes, is what you would expect everybody in your company who is involved with BIM in one shape or another to understand. And these they are very I would say simplistic questions, but you know, that's really good if you've written them. They are focused around the general knowledge of BIM. So it would ask questions such as, what you know, if you're looking for something to do with file naming or container naming, which British standard would you go to for that? It looks at the wider aspect of that, so it covers all of the British standards, but also the pillars of BIM in inverted brackets that go around that. So, you know, BS 851 for 8541, which is object naming, 8536, which is about the handover of projects, the CI BIM protocols in Uniclass. That's the basic level. The next section there, the adoption and management of BIM Level 2, is really for the people who are implementing this strategically. So this is more about the people, the BIM managers, I guess, if you want to talk about that, who are there to actually plan the strategic rollout and the actual understanding in their industry and within their company of what those standards actually mean in practice. Above that then, we've got more detail in the management level, which is much more delving into the specifics of running projects, actually being able to understand not just which document something comes from or where to look for something, but actually what in practice those standards actually mean. So that would start to look into detail if we were using file naming as an example of how the file naming breaks down, which codes are required, which codes are optional on projects. So far more detail into that. And then finally, the last group there, the practical BIM fundamentals, are actually a set of questions that we've revisited recently that have been around for a while and proven very popular. They are more the hands-on dealing with how BIM implements. So in that one, you'll get much more, if you're familiar with the KnowledgeSmart kind of approach of downloading files, investigating information within those files, and then re-entering your answer to a question based on interrogating information. So there you've got a really wide, broad spectrum of different assessment types that, of course, depending on your own particular needs, and everybody's roles tend to be unique in this, they can be mixed and matched, and of course there's full kind of availability to customize and put those sets in as you want them. But this is a kind of a typical standard that we put together to be able to provide as much flexibility as possible. Then go on to the next slide there, Rory. So this one there, then we move on past the technical, the strategic kind of approaches, and we've looked at the authoring tools. Many of these assessments existed already, but what is, again, they've been revisited and added in specific sections that apply to the BIM application of these tools. So you can see what we've done there is we've got the fundamental Revit, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with, moving on to the advanced, the fundamentals for EcoSim, and the fundamentals for the advanced for EcoSim. But they've had new modules added in that actually apply the BIM concept to them. So that would include things like how Uniclass can be used within a model, and how IFC can be used, for example, as importing and exporting. So there's a bit more practical application of BIM Level 2. And then now very good complementary sets of questions to the strategic ones, especially for people who are in charge of production and actually delivering these projects, and BEPs and MPDTs and all the other lovely acronyms that you wish were called normal things. And then moving on to that, then we have, back one slide please, we've got the coordination works, so that not only are we talking about the information that's produced, we are then looking at the validation and verification of that information using some of the collaboration tools there listed, such as Revit, Navisworks, and importantly Celebri. And tying this all together as part of a process, using software to deliver a process rather than just to build a model. Thanks, Rory.
Thanks, Nigel. That's great. So, and again, as Nigel was saying, it also kind of gives you the ability to apply this material business in the most relevant and applicable way. So, as always, with the KnowledgeSmart library tools, you have full editorial control of all of the material. So what we've tried to do is give you access to a large library, a large pool of questions which cover all sorts of different aspects of the way that this software is deployed in your firm, of the way that BIM as a process, as a business strategy is applied to your engineering consultancy or your design firm or your multidisciplinary environment. And whether you're based here in the UK and have all of the BIM Level 2 documents, or whether you're based in other parts of the world, which some of the audience today is, there's still a lot of relevant material here, and you then have the ability to cherry pick, filter out the bits that aren't specifically relevant to your firm or your environment or your location. But there's enough material in there, I think, that will enhance the way that you capture knowledge across this subject matter, which is obviously very important to all of us right now in the industry. And we've also tried to give you a good feel for which new titles in the library would be most relevant depending on the role. So as Nigel was just saying there, depending on what your responsibility is within your business or your practice, if you're tasked with operational activities, or whether you're actually doing the modeling work, or whether you're coordinating or managing, or whether you're running the business at a more senior level, there's still a need to know different aspects about this topic that will help you in your communication day to day with your teams. So that's what we've tried to do, and that roles and responsibilities is not a sentence that gives you a feel for how to approach that material. So in terms of the logistics, the pricing, how have we added this to the library? So for existing customers, it's simply one more band up on the price model. And for those of you, we'll have a quick look at that in 1 second. But for example, if you had a Pro 1 license, this would be a hop up to Pro 2, Pro 2 to Pro 3, and so on. If you're an enterprise customer, as is always the philosophy, we just bundle in whatever content you want as part of your existing license for no additional cost, and this is the same. For those of you new to KnowledgeSmart, if you wanted to access to all of the new BIM material, that would again just be a Pro 1 license in the library. And if you wanted to supplement that with the suite of technical software assessments, for example, EcoSim or Revit, that would be a Pro 2 license. And in terms of the bit of an eye test here, but just to give you the general concept, there's two very simple things which determine the cost of a KnowledgeSmart subscription. It's a rolling annual 12-month license, and we have those user bands which determine whether a firm is small, medium, large, or very large, and then the different library topics. So one primary topic might be Revit, for example. Two primary topics might be different disciplines of Revit, so architecture or structure, or MEP and structure. Three topics might include something like AutoCAD or MicroStation or maybe EcoSim, and 4 topics or greater, you'd probably go for an enterprise. So if you're looking to assess across a really wide range of topics, then enterprise is probably the most relevant license type for you. So again, just to give you a sort of feel for how this might affect existing, for a small firm, it's only an additional nominal fee topped up onto the license, and you get access to all of those new banks of questions which cover the whole BIM Level 2 ecosphere that Nigel was just describing. And for bigger, and it's not a huge investment, it's just a small additional top-up fee prorated back to your anniversary date, which will give you access to all of that new material in your library for all of your users across those different roles and responsibilities. We've also been asked by a number of firms which we have listened to and paid attention to, so we're tweaking the price model in January. And so we've listened to that. We've introduced a new price band from the new year, which just takes into account those firms with sort of around about 35, 40, up to 50 users in their teams. So that's a small. Capturing assessment data in a means of capturing a different type of information. So we've created a BIM survey linked and aligned to the UK government BIM Level 2 Learning Outcomes Framework. So those are the 3 primary areas that the Learning Outcomes Framework covers. And we've created this service free. There's no cost for this. It'll just be added to your dashboard if you want access to it. And you can just deploy that to internal teams or external partners or anyone across your supply chain or partner environment. If you want to just capture more information in terms of understanding, experience, opinion on their level of understanding and experience of the different aspects of the Learning Outcomes Framework around BIM Level 2. And again, you can just pull that into your dashboard, analyze that data alongside the assessment results that you have access to. So it's just a different type of data capture, some new metrics to pull in there, and it does make for some really illuminating data analysis when you look at those results alongside the assessment results. And it's obviously questions which don't have a right or wrong answer, which will be included in that survey environment. So, as well as all the material that Nigel's been referring to, we've obviously got the existing KnowledgeSmart library, so broken down into the different disciplines. It's quite a large body of material now. We've been working on this library for a number of years, and again, we wanted to give you the means of being able to capture experience and evidence of capability across a range of different software products that you use on projects, and also a range of different levels of experience, whether someone's a novice or an intermediate or an advanced user. We wanted to give you the means of deploying an appropriately pitched test, but also if people are a bit more experienced, then the ability to take them a bit further, to give them a more challenging assessment experience in their discipline. So that library is there. It's available in addition to obviously all of the new material that we've been creating around the management of the software, the authoring, and the BIM process side of the data that you're capturing. So I'm just going to hand back to Nigel again now, just for a word on the industry alignment. So we've been asked a number of times this year on how the new material is to be positioned in industry. So what we're not trying to do is to create a new qualification or a new certification vehicle. That isn't our intent at all. So I'm just going to pass across to know how we align with what's there in the.
Yep, thanks, Rory. I think it's really important to make that point, that this is of itself not a certification process. I'm sure many of you in this webinar from the UK will have seen the initiatives being taken on by BRE and Lloyd's and all those kind of things to demonstrate BIM level 2 compliance and assessments to do that. This isn't competition to those. This is about identifying skills gaps and, more importantly, identifying capabilities. So as it's required in the British standards, it is recognized now that companies need to provide demonstrative proof of their skills and capabilities when undertaking a BIM project. It's part of the pre-qualification questionnaire issues. Again, those guys from the UK, you may be familiar with PAS 91 that outlines the pre-qualification questionnaires for projects, and there's specific sections in that on BIM. Now, the way this is positioned, and it's something that we've been quite involved with Rory in defining this, is to make sure that we are demonstrating the capability and ability of staff, not certification itself. So the results you get from the KnowledgeSmart assessments that you take can be fed in to any one of those assessment capability, one of those assessment criteria, should you need to, if you are undergoing BIM level 2 compliance, or they can be fed directly into the PAS 91 or any other pre-qualification questionnaire that you may have had to take part in a BIM project. Next slide, please, Rory. So what we can say is you know, have you actually undergone training? Have you actually ever done it before? It can be used conversely to actually assess whether that training has been suitable or not. So whether you've gone out to any of the recognized courses from BRE or you've done internal training, the one thing that we found really useful for these assessments as well is to demonstrate that that training has been achieved and you have reached a certain requirement in your knowledge and understanding of what BIM means, either for the industry as a whole or for your internal company definitions of that. So certification, accreditation, it's none of that. It's just about demonstrating the requirements of individual staff to fit into whatever assessment criteria you need. Thanks, Rory. Back to you.
Thanks, Nigel. So yeah, we wanted to try and make that point really clear, because we do get asked quite a lot in the course of a day-to-day business if we are sort of a competitive tool to something like Microsoft certification or Autodesk certification or Adobe certification, and the answer is always no. We don't try to be that. We try to complement those things where possible, but it's the job of the vendor, in our opinion, to be the vehicle for formal certification. And as Nigel was saying, the industry has a number of different vehicles for firms to be able to go out and commercially engage with these organizations to look at formal qualification or certification as part of their wider business processes. So what we were trying to achieve here was on the other side, really on the gap analysis side, on trying to capture useful data to feed into that wider learning and development roadmap. And part of that journey really is to be able to look at that both from an organizational point of view, from a team point of view, maybe an office point of view, but also drill down as far as each individual, just to sort of see, relative again to their role, where they are in their journey of sort of competence with both the technology that they're using, but also that the environment within that technology is deployed. So part of that within the system, which some of you may be familiar with, but others won't be, is each user, when they're added to the KnowledgeSmart system, when they're invited to take an assessment, they also have in the background set up, which you have control as the system administrators, their own personal user dashboard. It's their own personal portal where they can capture their own history of assessment invites, results, scores, different charts and aspects of how they've been doing. And the idea here is really to give individuals a bit more control and power over their own progress, and hopefully measuring over a period of time the improvements that they're making in all of these key areas. And as Nigel just spoke of briefly a second ago as well, in the one-on-one environment, useful from an HR point of view if a user's sort of having a review. Excuse me one sec. I'll just have a quick sip of water. If they're having a review or a one-on-one, this gives them evidence that they can log into independently to be able to provide data for their HR team or their management team on what they've been doing in the course of that year, and also to try and help set goals for future learning and training, and very specific gap analysis on what they're doing well, but also if there's any areas for improvement, it'll be highlighted very specifically for them and their management team. In the wider context, it's also useful for firms to be able to just get a view for how they're doing in terms of the rest of the industry. So firms are always quite interested in seeing how they compare both nationally and internationally with respect to their use of different software. And what we've been doing over the last several years is we've been capturing thousands of different results for all sorts of different assessments, mainly the most popular topics in the library. So you won't be surprised to hear that's topics like Revit, Civil 3D, AutoCAD, MicroStation, those sorts of tools that are widely deployed and used by firms of architects and engineers around the world. And we've captured a huge number of statistics, thousands of results, and created quite credible benchmarks for all of those different territories for those different software tools. So firms can now compare their own performance against their peers and competitors across industry, but in a safe, anonymous way. We also are able to capture quite a lot of information about each individual user. So again, nothing too personal, but just information about who they are, what their job title is, how long they've been using the software tools, the context within which they use it, whether they use it full-time or part-time, whether they learned to use those tools in a formal environment, formally trained, or perhaps on the job in a slightly more informal environment. And again, it's sort of interesting to see, comparing like with like, how the different users are doing the deployment of the software. And excuse me, we also capture very specifically that data across different territories. So in the US, for example, we capture data on a state-by-state basis, so firms can get a view for how the different tools are used in a fairly broad range of territories across North America, and also different territories around the world can sort of compare performance as well. And then it's much more relevant for users then to be able to get a feel for how their peers who've got a very similar level of experience to them are also doing, because it's one thing comparing to quite a high level benchmark, but it's also another thing being able to compare with other people who are broadly similar in experience and professional background to themselves. So that's a little bit about the user portal and the wider picture, the benchmark stats that are available to all KnowledgeSmart customers as a means of comparison in the data analysis that follows the assessments and the surveys once they've been deployed. So that's a little bit about that topic. And in terms of what, we've also been working with our customer base on taking requests for other slightly different aspects of knowledge capture. So some of the most popular requests we've had over the last year or so have been around the business of project management. So we've been working with specialist authors over the last 6 months to create new assessments around 2 different platforms in particular, 2 new vendors for us as well. So we're very excited to be adding 2 new major vendors to the KnowledgeSmart portfolio. First is Oracle with their Primavera P6 platform, and the second is Microsoft with 2 new Microsoft project assessments which look in detail at that software in the context of project management. And we've also been asked to add MS Office to the library, which we have said no to in the past, because the reason we said no was not because we didn't think it was relevant, but we just weren't sure if it was the right focus, given that we'd kind of been working for such a long time in the CAD and the BIM space and the engineering space. But it kind of made sense. So over the last 6 months, we've been working with specialist authors to create assessments for Microsoft Excel in fundamentals and advanced level, and that's just been finished, and that's ready to go now. And we're also adding Microsoft Word to the library for the new year. So again, if you've got different people in the office, maybe in the back office or the admin support teams, that you might want to capture their knowledge, either in terms of training needs or perhaps as part of the hiring process, then those titles will be added to the library very, very soon. So that's a new direction for us, which we're very excited. In terms of who we work with around the world, just coming to the conclusion of the presentation, then we'll open up for questions. We're also very privileged and honoured to be working in partnership with a number of leading training and consultancies, BIM consultancies around the world, and we've sort of worked very hard to try to make the outputs of the KnowledgeSmart system complement their services. So whether it's a training service, or whether it's a recruitment service, or whether it's a consultancy and a BIM consultancy service, we like to try to add value to the conversations that they're having with their customers, many of whom we share, so that they can kind of drill down into the performance that these firms are currently experiencing, and add that data, add those metrics to that wider strategic conversation that's taking place, so that they can feed that information in to make better business decisions. It is much easier to make good management decisions if you have good data to hand, and we're very honoured to be working with a number of these firms very closely. To hand back to Nigel briefly in the close, really, it's interesting to see how lots of different organisations around the world are approaching the business of BIM, whether they're a small firm or a large multi-office consultancy around the world. So, Nigel, would you say that that's a sort of a fair statement, that all these firms have similar challenges regardless of size and scale?
Absolutely. I mean, the one thing that we're not surprised about anymore is whenever we go into a new business and look at how they're using the technology, the size of the company is the last thing to consider, because in the end, it's always down to the individuals that are delivering that project, regardless of whether there's 200,000 of them, or there's just 20 of them, or even in some cases just 2 of them. You know, it's about individual understanding of what it is you're trying to deliver. And to be honest, that's why we got into the KnowledgeSmart arena in the first place, was to understand where those skills need to be improved, regardless of the size of the practice. I mean, there's a really good sample of your customers there, Rory, and, you know, you go from the massive to the fairly small, and, you know, there are even smaller practices listed there that are using KnowledgeSmart to really good effect. You know, the only difference I think we see in sizes of firms is how they use those results afterwards, you know, whether they're tying it into advanced HR systems, or whether they're using it for their own kind of one-to-one personal reviews. I think that's the only difference we ever see. But the one thing, just in conclusion, to kind of say is that regardless of the company size, regardless of the arena you're actually working in, this testing thing, KnowledgeSmart it's not about just testing applicants for CAD skills anymore. It's about the progressive, ongoing professional development, capturing those metrics, the measurement of skills development, the measurement of gap analysis in all the different projects, and be able to demonstrate improvement in all aspects, not of technology, as we said right at the start, but the design, the construction, the delivery and management of projects across the whole board in AEC industry. Thanks, Rory.
Thanks, Nigel. Yeah, absolutely agree. So that is the end of the formal presentation. So if any of you have any questions or you wanted to circle back to any of the points we covered in the presentation, we'd be more than happy to cover those now. And Lisa, I think we hand over to you just to kind of administer those questions.
If you would like to raise your hand to ask a question live, that's also a possibility. Otherwise, you can post your question in the chat box or in the question area. We do have a couple of questions, Rory. One is around how does the licensing model work with KnowledgeSmart? So the question is specifically about what would be deemed an assessment topic. Okay, yeah, that's a good question. So in the library, we have, for example, an umbrella topic might be something like Revit architecture, for example. And then underneath that library umbrella topic, there might be 9 or 10 different assessments. So a Pro 1 license would cover all of those different assessments under that umbrella topic of, for example, Revit architecture or Revit structure, or Revit MEP or Civil 3D or whatever it might be. So one topic is kind of the umbrella, and there's often quite a number of different assessments that sit under that main header. Thanks, Roy. I'm going to try and group a few of the questions because they're sort of a similar theme. So there is a question about what is best practice in terms of rolling out these assessments. There's one person who sort of said, can I try the assessments on an individual basis? And then how to sort of, roll it out on a team level. You have a lot of experience with this. So what is best practice in terms of getting started?
Yeah, good questions again. So we tend to, I mean, you can, if you want to, as an individual, assess your skills by all means, and a number of people do. I mean, the service itself is not marketed as a consumer product, so we don't have a business to consumer model as such. We tend to work with recruitment firms if individuals want to measure their skills, and then they work with the recruitment partner to add a skills assessment result to their overall portfolio. So that's a good way of doing it from an individual point of view. We tend to market the service to AEC businesses, so firms of architects and engineers and multidisciplinary firms in the built environment, because they're the ones that tend to need to capture and apply metrics across a slightly broader user base. So it can serve both audiences, but primarily we try to put a message together for the businesses that exist within the AEC space rather than the individuals themselves.
Thanks,
Rory. Can I just throw a point in there that might be useful? Please. Just this is specifically about the BIM launch and things like that. So the way we've approached it with companies on this front is to actually go in and do workshops and training first, so that we've actually given them the broad level of BIM understanding, and then used the BIM awareness module to assess whether they've understood and they have reached the level of knowledge that was required of the firm for that side of things. In conjunction with that, what we've then been doing is doing gap analysis using some of the more advanced BIM modules, the theory, the strategic rules, the BIM management side of things, to find out whether the teams they've put in place to actually implement BIM have the required skill sets they need, and then actually based additional training for those more specific roles around that. So, it's a good example of how you can use it at different levels for either a complete company or small individual groups within a company to get the specifics you need out of what they require for their job. Thanks, Rory.
Thanks both. And then just a question once again on the pricing model. So just touching a little bit on when would a company opt for the pay-per-use purchase, or when would they actually go for a subscription you know, there's a couple of companies that might want to try pay-per-use at first.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we do try to cater for lots of different requirements and needs, and depending on the volumes. So we have an introductory level subscription which starts at only a few $100s a year, so it's not a hugely expensive service. But if there is just a very occasional need to take assessments, then the pay-as-you-go model is quite sensibly priced at $50 an assessment. And if they only want to run sort of 4 or 5 tests a year, usually for new or potential hires, then that's the best model for that requirement. And then if they find that they want to do more regular in-house assessments for existing teams, then the subscription model kicks in at the lower end, 1 to 25 users, and then obviously if they've got more people, those different user bands that we looked at earlier in that price sheet would apply. Yeah, pay-as-you-go has certainly got its place, but it's only for those firms who've got a pretty small requirement for annual testing numbers and volumes.
Thanks, Rory. And then just a question around customization. So obviously, how easy is it? What is the process involved? That is quite a complex issue to tackle. But if you can maybe just comment on, you know, if they don't find the content as it is to be quite suitable to the exact requirements, the options that are available to them.
Yeah, it's a good question. So in terms of the library, what we wanted to do, rather than creating just an empty shell and giving a vehicle for firms to be able to go out and test teams for material that they created themselves, what we tend to find is most businesses are very busy working on day-to-day design and engineering projects. So they have the ability to create training and assessment material. They don't have the time, and that's the reality. So we wanted to create a system which gave them a really good means of analyzing data and deploying assessments, but we also wanted at the same time to have a second string to our bow, which was content creation. And then that's why over the period of the last few years, we've collaborated with a number of very talented authors around the world to create a pool of questions around different topics. But then we also wanted to give firms the final editorial control. So we think it's the best of both worlds. We think we've given design and engineering firms the ability to make the assessments as relevant as possible to their own particular audience and their own particular environment, their own standards and workflows, the way that they deploy software, their standards, their document management systems, all that type of thing. So they have got full editorial control of all of the KnowledgeSmart material. If they want to make customized changes, they can also create original material and fold that into the library. Or if they want to, they can just use the assessments completely as they are, off the shelf, if they haven't got that much time or resource to make those changes. So really it's as flexible as it can be. And most firms over time, when they get familiar with the library, they do tend to make changes because they sort of repurpose some of the questions around their audience. They remove bits that aren't relevant, or if there's a few questions in there that they just don't like the way they're phrased, they can either change the phrasing or just deselect them so they don't come up in the random mix. So yeah, we think it's really important to give firms the final editorial control so that they can choose the nature of the assessments that get deployed, and that then subsequently makes the data that gets captured for the analysis part of the learning journey much more powerful and relevant, and then that gets fed into more tailored training downstream of the assessment results.
Thanks, Rory. And then one last question is about any future plans for developing other regional specific BIM content. So, you know, this content was sort of developed with the UK BIM Level 2 mandate in mind. Any plans for developing further content, for example, for the US or for Australia or any other regions?
I mean, conceivably, the answer is yes. So we can create content around any subject, and the key is the stability of the documentation, where that particular territory or country is in terms of the evolution of its BIM journey. and the availability of suitably qualified authors to be able to write the material to a sufficiently high standard, and then they can roll that out. So I mean, I think that being said, there are a lot of firms around the different territories that we work with who've explained to us that the BIM Level 2 stuff does actually apply quite relevantly to the work they're doing in different parts of the world as well as the UK. So I don't know, Nigel, if you've got a feel for international BIM as a topic.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, I've just done quite a bit of work in the US this year, for example. I think the only difference we've got there between the actual process we're talking about is difference in terminology. Where we call it BIM Level 2, the US is calling it VDC. So a lot of this work that has been done is actually relevant to those other areas as well. Now, clearly questions about the British standards are only relevant to countries where the British standards apply, but we're talking about ISO 13567 being broadcast out to a wider audience out in Europe, for example. So suddenly the principles that these questions have got apply to the whole of anywhere governed by the ISO standards. So yeah, we're not talking specifically UK content here. It's phrased that way, but actually it's not that big a task to map it out to other countries' requirements. The one thing I would say to kind of back up what you were explaining just then, Rory, is it's about not just the stability of the documents and their maturity, but also whether they are applicable to the wider audience. Are they official standards? And that's the big difference that we've had here in the UK that's allowed us to do this work to this degree, is the fact that they are British standards. You are required to work that way on public projects procured since April 2016. And as we said before, the private industry is taking suit, but the principles apply and they can be mapped quite easily, yes.
Okay, and then just one last question around how do you see the assessments fitting in with training content that the companies might have? There's a comment about any coaching or notes that are linked to the assessments. If you can just touch on that, Rory.
Yeah. So when we write questions, we also try to provide quite detailed feedback. So again, with most aspects of the admin interface, there's the option for administrators to customize the user experience and how much feedback users receive at the end of their assessment and when they receive that detail. So as part of the authoring process, we also ask authors to write what we call coaching notes, which is basically a bit more background information to each exercise or each question, how the author might approach the exercise if it's a practical exercise, or perhaps just a little bit more background information to the question, and perhaps pointing to some more resources for further learning on that particular topic or subject. So coaching is quite an important part of the feedback, because sometimes when you do an assessment and you drop some points, you instantly think, okay, I got that wrong, what should I have done? And that's the job of the coaching, really, is to fill in those gaps for the user feedback part of the journey. And then what we also do is, when we're writing questions, just purely on a technical note, we write very specific meta tags or training tags assigned to each exercise. And we use those training tags to map what we call links to learning. So if we can find the most relevant corresponding modular learning content that's available, regardless of who the author is of the training material, we will try to do a mapping exercise so that users can point the outputs of their assessment across to the most relevant training and learning content, so that they can start automatically and straight away to start filling in those skills gaps that get identified during the assessment.
Thank you very much, Rory. I think that was the last question. I just want to remind everyone that our BIM Assessment Collection brochure is available in the handout area. So please feel free to download that. And also the recording link will be shared in a follow-up email if anyone is interested.
Great, thanks, Lisa. And certainly from my point of view, I'd just like to say thank you all once again for taking the time out of your busy schedules today to join the presentation. I'd like to pass on my thanks, as always, to Nigel for joining me in presenting today, and we really are grateful to you for your time, so thank you very much.